Good morning, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on Innovating for Better Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities, a focus on transport and legal services. A special welcome to our speakers. So, thank you for being here. We have on the list of our speakers Linda Ristagno, who's the head of accessibility at IATA, International Air Transport Association. And we have Sandra Witzel, CMO at SkedGo. We have Blaž Pongraček, Senior Advisor Passenger at CER, the Community of European Railway and Infrastructure Companies, and Apur Kulkarni, Head of Research and Head of Center for Inclusive Mobility at OMI Foundation. Thank you everyone for being here. And of course, myself, my name is Sagar Singham Setti. I'll be hosting this session today and I'll be moderating today's session. I'm the managing partner at Grayspace Law and Policy Consulting, and we are based in Belgium. Our legal and policy consultancy primarily focuses on transport, trade, and technology sectors. But apart from that, I think what is important or very relevant for us is the disability and diversity commitment that we have as a firm. And our idea is to bring senior leaders to have an open discussion about the opportunities and challenges faced by the people, especially persons with disabilities, and also people coming from diverse backgrounds. So the objective of the webinar is to raise awareness, understand where we stand today. We have come a long way, by the way. It's not like we are at a start. But again, there is also something we need to see and discuss. What is it that we can do together as we move forward for better inclusion of persons with disabilities? So that's the objective. So let me just before I give it to the speakers who will be presenting each around 7 to 8 minutes they're going to take, and they'll run you through their experience and what is it that they're actually doing. But let me put some context before we actually move on to our presenters. So on every year, as you probably know, 3rd December is marked as the International Day for Persons with Disabilities. Um, well, the topic of disability can make many people uncomfortable and to some extent even considered taboo by some. However, at least personally and as well as professionally, it's important to have an open and respectful conversations about disabilities in order to promote understanding, empathy, and acceptance so that we can begin dealing with more pressing issues about existing physical and attitudinal barriers at individual, organizational, and systemic levels, and that continue to hinder and hold back people living with disabilities from fully participating in all aspects of life. And to be clear, there are many kinds of disabilities, both visible and invisible. Some people are born with disabilities or impairments, while others result from injury, illness, or old age, to name a few. Before I clearly, turn over to the speakers, let me just give you three facts, and I'm sure probably you are aware of it. We have an estimated 1.3 billion people across the globe experiencing significant disability. So this represents around 16% of the world's population. In other words, 1 out of 6 of us are disabled. And what does that mean? It means from a health standpoint, it is that it gives like inequities from unfair conditions faced by persons with disabilities, and including stigma, discrimination, poverty, exclusion from education and employment, and barriers faced in the health system itself. What is important for the purpose of this discussion today, and one clear fact that has come out from a UN study as well, as persons with disabilities find inaccessible and unaffordable transportation 15 times more difficult than for those without disabilities. So, having put that background, or at least having said that, um, so you understand the critical or the importance that transport plays. So, one of the areas that we are focusing today, or the discussion and the speakers would be focusing here, is on the transport sector. So, I will first call on Apurv to make his presentation. And to the audience, please feel free to raise any questions and we will pick it up here and we will answer those questions. So, Apur, over to you, and maybe you can present yourself, and I will run the slides for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sagar. It's wonderful to be here. Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're watching. Um, as the slides are loading up, let me just quickly give you a quick introduction about myself. My name is Apur Kulkarni, and I head research at OMI Foundation. We are a new age policy research and social innovation think tank. I myself live with a disability and I don't see very well, which means I'm visually challenged. And through my work across various domains, I've been contributing to make the world more accessible, especially in the realms of transport and mobility. And it's a matter of great honor that I've been conferred with the President's Awards, a national award in recognition of my work from the President of India. Let me just take you through some of the presentation itself. If we can go to the next slide, please. So OMI Foundation is basically a policy research and social innovation think tank. We work through three interconnected centers of excellence, which is Center for Inclusive Mobility, Center for Future Mobility, and Center for Clean Mobility. Under Center for Inclusive Mobility, we conduct a lot of research to make sure that transport and mobility services are accessible for people with disabilities and other marginalized communities. Next slide, please. So Sagar alluded to the global estimates of people with disabilities. But largely what we've seen is people with disabilities are somewhat of an invisible lot in the sense that you don't see them in a day-to-day life. And that also reflects in data in some form. So for example, the census from 2011 in India um, estimates that there's about 26.8 million people with disabilities. But when we take into account the global estimates, we are looking at somewhere upwards of 180 million people with disabilities who live in India. Now, no matter which number you lean towards, I think there's no denying the fact that people with disabilities do form a very large majority, a very large population. In fact, they're the largest minority, as you put it, in a society. And therefore, it's very important that we equip these individuals to perform at their best, to access various socio-economic opportunities, and mobility plays an important role over here. Next slide, please. Um, to understand the challenges that people with disabilities faced, we conducted a very comprehensive research in partnership with 8 organizations who work for empowerment of people with disabilities. We took a close look at three modes of transport, primarily through the lens of three disability groups, which is visual, locomotor, and deaf and hard of hearing. And through primary research involving interactions with men and women who live with a disability and travel frequently, we were able to identify the issues and the gaps that exist and that need to be bridged. Next slide, please. We can take a look at some of the findings. Next slide. If I have to leave the group with one high-level understanding, is that when you think about accessibility for people with disabilities, it's important to take a trip chain view, in the sense that you have to think about right from the time that one starts planning for a trip to the point when you have completed a trip, paid for it, and if there's any issue, work towards its resolution. Interventions such as making individual train station accessible or a bus service accessible do have their value. But to generate the full return on investment, I think a trip chain lens is very, very important. Next slide. And this realization was all the more during COVID. I wouldn't go too much into it right now for in the interest of time. Next slide. Let me take you through some of the key findings. So to begin with, walkability, which kind of pertains to first and last mile connectivity within a transport system, is a huge issue. For a non-disabled individual, it's a matter of getting out of their house or office, walking to a bus stop or a train station, or whatever a mode of transportation you choose, getting into the ride and completing it. But for someone who lives with a disability, there are questions like, is the road safe for me to wheel on if I'm using a wheelchair? Or for that matter, are there going to be stray animals on the street and I need to watch out for them if I'm living with a visual disability and I'll not be able to identify them from a distance? There's also consideration around digital accessibility because a lot of our planning and payments, etc., do happen through digital means. Safety is a prevailing and overarching concern. Just to give you a perspective of a woman who lives with a disability, uh, in an event of an emergency, a non-disabled woman probably can, let's say, jump off a vehicle, and but those options are not available for women with disabilities. And uh, you know, uh, there are various concerns like these that make it all the more important to focus on safety for women and people with disabilities. Next slide, please. I'd like to draw your attention to the accessibility issues in metros and local trains. In India, we've observed that the inaccessibility begins right from the built environment because many of these infrastructures have staircases at their access points. There is a lot of encroachment by shopkeepers and what have you at the entrances, which makes it difficult for any non-disabled individuals also to enter the premises, all the more for someone who lives with a disability. On top of that, there are dysfunctional elevators, staircases to cross across platforms, lack of support from women, which is especially important for women passengers. Um, um, Likewise, the fact that in compartments which are reserved for people with disabilities, you do find a lot of non-disabled individuals traveling. All of these experiences make an already difficult journey all the more difficult and undesirous. And again, that results in loss of opportunities from a socio-economic standpoint. Next slide, please. If we were to think about buses, right from the fact that the bus stops themselves are in a state of disrepair many a times or are not built as per the accessibility standards, what happens is it's difficult to access them. And we're talking about not only regular conditions, but conditions when it's, let's say, raining, when it is hot and sunny. All of those conditions pose additional challenges. For someone who lives with a visual disability, when a number of buses come together, it's difficult to be agile and independent enough to be able to identify the own bus and then work towards boarding it. In India, unfortunately, what happens is the concept of precision docking, which means the bus stops at a particular designated place, is not followed very well. Which means that for someone who may not be as mobile, has to work that much harder to board the bus and sometimes even miss it in the process. For if you were to cross all of these hurdles, many a times ramps and other equipment in the buses are not accessible, they are not used or maintained properly, which means that with all of this hard work, you're still left in a place where you're not able to board your bus. And I'd like to highlight one more, which is very, very important, that we've observed many buses, especially drivers and conductors, simply don't stop when they see someone who's living with a disability to offer the service. And this, in addition to everything else that we've talked about, creates huge disenfranchisement, something which we need to take a look at and rectify as a society. Next slide, please. Issues also exist when you think about intermediate public transport, right from hailing a cab or a rickshaw independently on the street. Uh, um, you know, there is difficulty in sighting a vehicle, and also stigma that's associated from the driver. Many of our participants have expressed deep dissatisfaction because the drivers have refused to carry them for reasons of stigma, for reasons of that they are not sure, and they fear for the safety of the individual as well as their own. Their assistive equipment is something that they don't want to carry. For instance, they don't want to put wheelchairs in their cabs for fear that the cabs will get dirty. um, what it also means that when there is a lot of demand and supply is relatively scarce, the people with disabilities who are traveling often end up paying more for the same trip as compared to a non-disabled individual, which essentially works like a disability tax. Today, when digital payments are becoming ubiquitous, unfortunately, the digital payment channels themselves are yet to be fully accessible, which means that you are still not able to make that critical step. And you have to carry cash and you have to endure all the risks that come with it. Next slide, please. Next slide. I'd like to conclude with a few recommendations that we would like all policymakers to consider. Number one, enumeration of people with disabilities is hugely important. Therefore, I think it's extremely important that disability age and gender disaggregated data be collected as a part of census, population counts, and other data gathering efforts as well. Secondly, it's important to notify standards for accessibility, not just for physical environment, but also digital environments, so that all service providers can make their services accessible. Thirdly, learning from COVID especially, it's important to ensure that countries' disaster response systems and every transport operator's disaster response system is fully cognizant of people with disabilities and equipped to handle them, support them in their moment of need. Next is it's public procurement is an important tool that needs to be leveraged. Over here, it's essential that universal accessibility be made an essential condition for all tendering and all public procurement efforts. For this market, which is still evolving and it's fairly nascent, it's important for the governments to announce fiscal and non-fiscal incentives so that we have innovation and market-driven growth in this space, making the transport services more accessible for all people with disabilities. um, uh, Last couple of points pertain to calling for the transport operators to announce accessibility policies and accessibility roadmaps and execute them to make systematic improvements to reach full disability inclusion per se. Lastly, this is not a one-time effort. It's not a one-time exercise. We need to continue to ensure that any services continue to be accessible. Gaps need to be identified and plugged. And towards that, accessibility audits, which are independently conducted and professionally conducted with people with disabilities, will play a huge role. These were all the recommendations I had. Next slide. Thank you so much for your time and patience, and I'd love to take any questions if there are any. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Apurv. Thank you very much for making the presentation. I think it's pretty clear. I think apart from, I think one of the questions that we are going to discuss about is how technology is actually helping or has become a barrier. I think you are kind of spot on that point. Like even though technology is there, but actually it is not assisting or helping in the way that it is expected. But on the other hand, I think what your presentation made clear as well is, despite whatever the efforts are being put in place as a society, I think there is a much bigger hurdle to overcome. And the question I would have right now is, what is it that we have to do, or maybe there is happening in terms of that, breaking that taboo? Because it's not about, the fact that you mentioned, like a cab or a wherever, whichever transportation mode you're talking about. and because they think something is going to get dirty and therefore they're not going to use a specific assistance, uh, it's not the right thinking. So what is it that maybe there is something that you're already doing in a 1.3 billion populated country, and with one of the biggest population in terms of disability, persons with disabilities. What is it, or how is it that you're breaking that barrier in your own way, let's say?
See, the what is undeniable is that both challenge and opportunity for disability inclusive transport and mobility services is huge. And whenever a large scale change like this needs to happen, four important, I guess, forces need to come together. One is, of course, political will, because it does require a lot of leadership and commitment to drive down changes, to change all the systems and infrastructures and upgrade them. Second thing is public financing. It's one thing to say that this is important, but it's another thing to put money behind your words. So, meaningful financing of accessibility improvements is extremely important, and that needs to happen continuously, systematically, in a way that its effectiveness is measured, monitored, like any other goal. Number third is partnerships. It's not like, even if we want, it's not just the government which has to play a role. Government, industry, civil society, research, academia, and people themselves have to come together to drive this change. So we need partnerships to work towards. And last one is, we do need people's participation, because it's not just physical or digital barriers, it's also attitudinal barriers, which need to be corrected right now, for people to be fully become cognizant of the impact of this inequity that's happening. International Labour Organization, for instance, estimates that exclusion of people with disabilities from workforce is costing as much as 7% of a country's GDP. Now, imagine what that kind of a change would look like for you as an individual, whether you are or not you live with a disability. So it's not just a matter of human rights, it's also a matter of self-interest and economic growth and development, that people need to get behind this, with political will coming together, with public financing coming together, and partnerships through industry, academia, civil society, and government. So all of these four things need to come together to be able to bring change at scale that we want right now and that is needed right now.
Thank you, Apur. I think probably we can close the webinar, maybe. You answered pretty much all the points that the
Yeah.
others have to share as well. But on the other hand, I think they're very relevant. I think that's probably
Yeah.
one of our big messages through the webinar, but also through the discussion, that we are having here. So just hold on there, and let's listen to the others. So I move on to Sandra now. So maybe over to you, Sandra, to make your presentation, and then we'll come back to you with questions.
Sounds good. Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. So give me 1 second. Entire screen. Here we go. Can you see my screen? Sorry, can you see my screen? I can't see you anymore, so you have to say something.
I think the screen is being displayed. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes,
Thank you very
Presentation
much.
is visible.
Thanks very much. I've only got one laptop here, so okay, great. Well, thanks very much. That was a really great presentation, Apoorv, and I've got a lot of points where I've got sort of similar experiences and findings and recommendations as well. So I think that really complements each other. Just firstly, as an introduction, so my name is Sandra Witzel. I'm a director and CMO of Skedgo. We are a mobility as a service platform provider. So we provide MaaS technology to governments and corporate clients so that they can provide a more holistic, sustainable, but also inclusive transport offering to their communities. I'm also the co-founder of the Women in Mobility UK network, and I'm a board trustee for the Research Institute for Disabled Consumers here in the UK. I've also lived with disability myself, so I do bring a personal angle to this debate too. Just quickly about SketGo, we've been around for quite a while. We're a global company with our headquarters in Australia and an office in Germany as well. We do B2B and B2G mass technology, and we have today integrated over 4,000 transport providers globally. And we really focus on individualized and accessible mobility solutions. So in the sort of mobility ecosystem, that's where we place ourselves. We're really trying to bring everything together and make it work for everybody, and really focus on the individual user needs within that offering. And I'll come back to this slide a bit later. So I'm just going to race you through my findings. So hold on for the ride. I just want to address a few misconceptions that if you work in the accessibility space, or if you're just starting a project, you will come across those. Accessible mobility is not fixed by having a wheelchair ramp. A wheelchair ramp is a small tool in your toolbox, which should include a lot of other measures to provide accessible mobility. So I get fobbed off quite frequently with, but we have a ramp, when that really doesn't address a lot of the issues that we need to fix. Another one is that barriers really come from bad design. They do not come from the disability itself. We should all be able to live in an environment where we can safely and freely move around and move to where we want to go at the time we want to go there. And if we can't do that, then really it's our environment that puts up these barriers. And another one is old infrastructure, very popular argument here in the UK. Oh, it's not accessible because we've got all this old infrastructure, to which my reply is, well, the infrastructure is old because it hasn't been modernized, and nobody has made this a priority to invest and upgrade infrastructure. Really, really important, because obviously technology can only do so much. If nobody puts the money into modernizing our built environments, then technology will very quickly reach certain limits. So here are just some examples, some that Apoorv mentioned in his presentation as well. The lack of level boarding, we really struggle with that in the UK here, and that really takes away the ability to travel spontaneously and safely for a lot of people. Disabled or elderly, or families with young children, tourists with suitcases, and anyone struggles with this, and it hasn't improved in the last years at all, unfortunately. This is another one that's been mentioned before, a lack of lifts or lift outages, badly maintained road infrastructure, pavement infrastructure, and overcrowding is a big issue as well on trains. And this is the Tube in London, for example. Overcrowding creates massive problems also for people who are neurodiverse, for example, and yeah, anyone else really. So I'll put that in the lack of accessible transport category as well, because it's quite a barrier. Now, you'd think with new mobility modes, we would have learned from our past mistakes and do things better. But the sad news is, no, we're not in a lot of cases, unfortunately. So here are just a few examples of what's happening at the moment in what is the forefront of new mobility, and where we keep repeating not considering disability and accessibility right from the start. So here's an example of a connected and autonomous vehicle. This is a shuttle. I believe this was a pilot here in the UK. A really cool vehicle, and autonomous shuttles should be fantastic for people with disabilities because they're so much more nimble, they're flexible, they can pick you up where you are and drop you off exactly where you want to go. And there should be a really efficient way of accessible transport. However, when I look at this vehicle, instantly a lot of red flags are raised. I see this really happy man standing here with his leg up on the step into the vehicle, and you can instantly see this is an incredibly high step. There might be a ramp. We don't know. I assume there is a ramp, But even then, this is a very high step. And you can see the yellow bar. That is a handrail on the inside of the vehicle. It's placed quite deep inside the vehicle, so it will be very hard to use that for someone who has mobility issues, or for someone who travels with small children, for example. And already I can see that there are numerous issues with this vehicle, and I've seen this on autonomous shuttles at conferences as well. This is another example where the designers have actually tried to make it look like this is an accessible vehicle, but I hope you can see that this ramp is so inadequate on so many levels, because it requires the exact height of a raised sidewalk or walkway for the wheelchair user to get in, and if there's no raised sidewalk, then I don't know what they would do, because with this kind of ramp, there will be no way they'd be able to enter the vehicle. Then we've got electric vehicle charging is another one where, unfortunately, disabled people are forgotten again. So here's an example of EV charging facilities that are not accessible. If you're in a wheelchair, for example, there would be no way you'd be able to use this. And then we've got e-scooters who also come with their own challenges. And e-scooter providers have struggled in the past to address this. It's getting a bit better, but again, this was a transport mode that's been created without considering accessibility needs at the start. So really, what I'm trying to say is disability is diverse, and we need to include this diversity right from the start. And there's some really great projects around the world doing that. So, and because disability is diverse, the solutions are very diverse as well. So I just want to run you through some positive examples of what's currently happening. And these are really just a few of really great technologies and projects that are out there. One is NaviLens. It's a Spanish project. It's basically a QR code that has been developed with accessibility in mind, because it's a lot easier to use. You don't have to angle your phone to be right on the QR code. You can see it here placed on a bus stop. You can stand to the side of the bus stop. You can be quite far away. Your phone will still be able to pick up this QR code and can tell you which buses stop here and when they're coming. So this is a really useful tool for metro stations, bus stops, and the likes. Really, really handy technology. Another one is Biometrics in Australia. They do, they call it effort mapping. So they map sidewalks and road crossings and pathways according to the effort it takes to use them. So they have fitted wheelchairs with very sophisticated technology to map these. It's a bit like what Google Street View does with their cars. And they put that in a map so that wheelchair users know which paths to use, how they can safely and easily get from A to B. But I mean, it also, when you look at this, it also helps everyone else. It would also help the family with a pram, or someone who has to drag their grocery shopping from A to B. So these are really useful tools as well. And I think they include about 20 different measures into their analysis to come up with these maps. So it's really sophisticated technology that they use, which is great. And hopefully we can cover the whole world with this at some stage. So you can just get up your map on your phone and see which is the best footpath to use for you. So within the MAS ecosystem, we're trying to bring all the transport modes together at get-go and create these really accessible solutions for people. So I just want to give you a very personal, real-life example of what they can look like. So this is Phoenix is a not-for-profit in the US that we're working with. It's one of our clients. And we've created MAS technology for them. to use for passengers in Detroit who have who use paratransit, so transport for people with medical needs and disabilities. And here's a great example. So this is Angelo. He's a real person. He's a law student who lives in Detroit, and he used to spend more than 250 hours a year on hold to book his transport to get to university and back, which is obviously absolutely ridiculous. Nobody should have to spend this much time trying to book their transport to get to anywhere, really. So what we've done, we've customized our mobility as a service application to be more user friendly, have an easier interface, and we've done this with focus groups as well. So we had disabled and elderly users in focus groups. We've given people the ability to put in their needs and requirements, and we've also given people the ability to have this booked through a third party, say a carer, for example. And really importantly, they can still pay cash in the vehicle. So we've got this high-tech offer, but there's a low-tech angle to it, which is you can still call someone if you want to, but you don't have to. And you can still pay cash if, for example, you're unbanked, you don't have a credit card, or you just don't know how to use a mobile phone. So what happens now, this is a really fantastic outcome. So Angelo now spends about 10 to 15 minutes per week to book his transport, which is obviously amazing. It gives him so much more time to get on with his life. There are a lot more really great examples. I won't go through all of them, but feel free to take a photo of this slide and have a look at all these fantastic projects around the world that are happening right now. And this is really what an accessible mobility ecosystem should look like, in my mind, or what needs to happen in order for our transport ecosystem to become more accessible. We need the right environment of awareness, encouragement, and pressure so that we can use new technology. We have the open data that we need, and we can apply all the universal design principles to create an accessible and safe mobility ecosystem for everybody. Following on Apoorv's recommendations that he made, I've broken this down into a very granular look at what can you do as an individual in your job right now in order to improve the situation. So please do take this home and apply this in your job or in your research and in your environment, where you consider accessibility in all aspects of your work, where you consult with and follow experts. There's really no excuse for not knowing anymore when you can follow people on LinkedIn and you can search for all the amazing research and projects that are out there so that you can stay up to date with what's happening. Challenge your own thinking and look at who's not in the room. What would someone with a variety of disabilities do right now? How would they feel? What are their struggles? Really challenge what is happening in your projects and create a team of advisors if you can. Get the people who know the in-depth sort of detail of what they need, get them on board and get them to help you create better solutions so that you then can contribute to reducing these problems. And so my last slide really is to just encourage you all to try harder, because access to transport is access to life. And we've got a really great opportunity here to change people's lives. So let's not miss that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Great. It's I think it's a great presentation, and also the fact that you have pointed out, what a bad design could bring, and we are not learning from the past. I would not say a mistake, because we don't know what is a mistake or what was right or wrong, but I think it has shown that it's not helpful for persons with disabilities, and we are still not learning, and which is something probably hopefully more awareness and more discussions around it probably would highlight, some of the difficulties and the challenges that the persons with disabilities are actually facing. I have one particular question. I mean, the fact that SCEDGO is, have a broad map, let's say, a geographical coverage. Um, is there a particular country or region would you consider where you consider like they are doing much better? Like or maybe they are following something or they're building something where we could learn from, or the in the other. Of course, as you said again, disability is diverse and solutions are diverse. Okay, but on the other
Yeah,
hand, maybe there is something where we could learn from some good practices from the other countries or other parts of the world.
I think, yeah, there's some. I mean, if you look at countries, there, Vienna, I think Austria, in particular, Vienna is a great example because Vienna has a gender mainstreaming department that also has a very strong inclusion and accessibility focus, because there's a strong overlap between inclusion of female transport requirements and accessibility. So because Vienna has done that for such a long time, they've really created a very positive environment where it's easy for people to get around, where it's safer for people to get around, and where people are able to leave their car at home no matter their health condition, because public transport has been set up for them in a way that's accessible and usable. So that's a really great example. Scandinavian countries are always at the forefront because they invest so much in public transport, which is really brilliant. But then the project I mentioned from the US is really interesting because this is driven by a not-for-profit. The US is obviously historically very car-centric, but they've also got the American Disability Act, which has done some good work. And we can now see the government funding pouring into these projects. And there's some great innovation coming out of the US as well. So that's really exciting.
Thank you, Sandra. I think let's listen to Blaž then, because maybe Blaž has some of these examples that you have shared, or not examples as such, but the live instances. But probably from a rail operator perspective, we can see how the digital apps or some other initiatives that the rail sector is taking. So Blaž, over to you, and yeah, maybe you want to share the presentation.
Yeah, I'm trying to. uh, I mean, I clicked. I don't know if it's going to show up. Yeah, there it is. Hope you see it. Thank you, Sagar, for the invitation, and thank you, of course, also for your attention. My name is Blaž Pongracic. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for Passenger Matter in CER. CER stands for Community of European Railways. We are an advocate association based in Brussels with the purpose of advocating for the interest of our members here with the EU institutions. We represent both railway undertakings, infrastructure managers, but also among our members, we also have partner organizations. We also have some ticket vendors and so forth. So as you can see, we sort of represent. I mean, the members represent 78% of the European rail network length, 94% of the passenger, and 81% of the freight business. So we like to think that we are, although we understand we're not the only one, but we represent quite a big part of the sector. And of course, because of that, we are also quite deeply involved in every time passenger right or accessibility as an issue is a topic here in Brussels. Just recently, on 7th of June, the revised rail passenger rights, for example, was put into force, which has also is quite a big leap also when it comes to helping people with reduced mobility in accessing our services. Now, the issue, of course, that railways face as a transport operator is that there is a very humongous. There's a large number of railway stations. I mean, in the European Union, it's more than 20,000 railway stations. So, of course, they were all built. We all know that railway has been here since the 19th century, and a lot of railway stations have been built in those 150 years, of course, also modified. However, back in the day, they were not, unfortunately, thinking about accessibility, but they had other priorities. This is, of course, changing now, also with the rail passenger rights. Railways are investing a lot of money, a lot of resources in adopting the railway stations, the rolling stock, the way we do business, the way we do services. Of course, it's very hard to do all at once. It's also very expensive, and unfortunately, the railways are not maybe the most profitable business in the world. So this of course will take time, and will need also help from the policymakers. But we are assured that we will get there. Now, for my presentation, what I wanted to quickly do, I promise I won't take too much of your time, just to present certain things my members do. Just for the sake of this presentation, I focused on three. So SNCF, that's the French Railways, the NS, the Dutch, and Deutsche Bahn, which is, of course, the very well-known German railways. Just to represent certain things that, aside the legislation, our members are doing to try to help people with reduced mobility and people with disabilities. Of course, as it was said, this is not the same thing. To make the travel more seamless, let's say. So I will focus, present digital solutions, then the access to trains. Accessibility has been pointed out in both presentations, amenities on board, and how our members cooperate with other associations, with representatives of people with disabilities. And then just quickly, as we are an organization meant for advocacy, I just wanted to quickly express also our position on the EU Disability Card, which is a directive proposed by the Commission back in 6th of September. For example, here is the SNCF digital solution, sort of also, is by providing people with reduced mobility. So with impaired, we have somehow to help them via sound, so that they have sort of through a phone or through a token vocal notifications where they are, if it's a red light, which train, for example, has just arrived, since for obvious reasons they don't see to the timetables. Of course, you also have then people who don't, so deaf people with hearing impairments that of course can't hear. So then through the visual aids, usually through the phone, SNCF provides text alerts. Let's say if a train is delayed, or if the platform has changed, or if they're arriving to stations and so forth. Then, of course, NS, which is a Dutch member, have an accessibility app for their services, where they're already in their app. You can see if you can enter a train with an assistance, or you don't need any assistance. So that's usually meant for people with that use the wheelchair, for example. As we will see later, we have rolling stock solutions where you can enter without an assistance. Of course, due to the passenger rights regulation, it was also in the previous, I believe, but currently you have a 24-hour notification period if you want to board the train with the assistance. So that sort of helps you when you plan your journey. Of course, I must say, the goal of the railways, of course, is that in the end nobody needs an assistant to board the train. It should be seamless, like for people without problems, issues with reduced mobility. However, as said, this will unfortunately take a while. Now, if we go to the Deutsche Bahn, which so far, 84% of their railway stations are stepless accessible. and however, they are trying their best to make it 100%. So on average, 100 railway stations per year are upgraded um, to reach that goal. Of course, that still is some ways off, but hopefully achievable in due time. And they have across Germany 16 mobile teams to take care of safe boarding and deboarding. As mentioned before, you have 24-hour notice period for all of these 5,700 railway stations to be boarded and deboarded. I mean, worth pointing out, of course, the problem with the assistance, is not it's not the big stations, but it's the small stations. So, for comparison, I think there are 330 international airports in the European Union. Maybe Linda can correct me, but I'm sure it's not more than that. So compared to more than 20,000, of course, there's a bit of a difference when providing for the assistance, and um, that's why also this 24-hour notice period. But for the big railway stations, usually this railway assistance is much shorter, the notification. So, for example, also so traveling without advance booking, an example of the Dutch railways with the so-called sliding step. No assistance is needed to board the train, as you just simply. Well, I guess the word is roll on, but I would, if somebody is a better native speaker, can correct me. Of course, then you also have amenities on board, like, of course, toilets, and maybe people with visual impairments, of course, don't see if it's occupied or not, for example. So here you have an example of the French trains where they use, of course, tactile indication of the status, for example, so it's easier to see. So for French railways also have so-called technical commission accessibility, where they have monthly meetings to discuss topics with the representative of the French PRM associations. Here you see example when they had tactile seat numbering for new rolling stock. They, of course, connected with the French PRM associations to ensure that these are useful and usable by their users. Now for the last last slide of my presentation, as I said, the Disability Card Directive and Parking Card Directive coming out on 6th of September, that hopefully being concluded already by April. This is something that will help people with disabilities to have recognized that status all over European Union. Now, a lot of pretty much every member state in European Union has a disability card. Some have even more than one, depending on the how to say level of disability. So this is sort of preventing people with disability to cross borders. It's hard anyway, but without having the same rights as, let's say, the national of the member states, probably even harder. Especially, for example, if you want to move to a place like Brussels to start working, and then all of a sudden you have even bigger issues than just having a disability. Of course, we support very strongly. We support this proposal because also our members on international trains, for example, the assistance person, for example, travels for free on all international travel. But now, let's say you're a German national and you wanted to book international train, you needed to book it in Germany because the disability card was only valid there. So you needed already to know when you're going back so that the assistant person traveled for free. But that's one of it. Examples, there are plenty more. Of course, we need to make sure that the disability card information of the benefits are clear. Of course, we don't want to be put in a position where we have to start explaining what is the right and what is not. So we really ask for the member states and the Commission to not only provide clear information, also have some sort of promotion campaign where this information is clearly communicated. And the third thing, maybe not so connected to accessibility, but for us a very important point, is that we should continue cooperation with the institutions to help us with the harmonization of ticketing conditions, because in Europe currently it's not only that we don't have harmonized what's a person with disability. Also in railways, the definition of a child depends on the member state, with the national legislation, for example, also um, definition of pensioner and so forth and so forth. So we are continuously asking to help us in this manner. And so, if there are any questions, happy to answer.
Thank you, Bilal. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think the fact that you pointed out that railways is modernizing, I think all transport sectors are taking that lead, or at least the transformation is happening. And I'm glad to see that, from the examples at least that you have shown, that both in terms of the rolling stock, but also in terms of the amenities that are provided on board, at least things are moving, things are changing, you know. But what uh, what kind of maybe something to learn more from you is, we have seen the three different carriers, operators providing services, let's say at a national level. But imagine there's a passenger who is, as you said, coming from Germany to Belgium, or in a longer distance, maybe to Switzerland. How is that going to, what kind of services or what kind of assistance is provided to persons with disabilities? Is there a more coordination between the railway operators, uh, or not, is one. And two is, how much discussions take place with the operators outside of the railway network? Because at the end of the day, we are all trying to connect or interconnect all modes of transports, from mass system to basically the intermodal. So we're trying to connect everything, but then how is it that the railway sector is trying to adapt or maybe amend some of their own? Because it's always difficult when once you have a design, it's difficult, and as you pointed out rightly, it's huge investment as well, so we cannot just change for one purpose or for one particular community of people.
Yeah. So for your first question, basically there are three areas that at least I see. One is the infrastructure, the second is the rolling stock, and the third are the services themselves, right? So there are working groups also inside our organization to provide, let's say, not the same, but at least sort of a unified way of providing information, providing access to the stations and to the train. So let's say more of an infrastructure level, what's the height of the platform? Where does the signage go? What does it say? What does it mean? Which things to provide for. I mean, that's definitely, I chaired a working group that meets around 5 times a year to discuss the so-called technical specifications for interoperability. It's the same thing happening on rolling stock, which is dealt with a different department. But anyway, of course, these things are also going on. But I mean, there's still rolling stock from the 50s driving on our networks. So we can imagine 70 years of a life cycle of a rolling stock. This is not a problem that will go away soon. However, I think majority cases, at least on the main lines, we are hopeful for the future. Because now also new high-speed trains, new modern trains are being ordered all the time. The manufacturers, the suppliers of the equipment have huge backlogs. So, I mean, the new trains are built at the maximum speed that they can at the current level. And then, of course, you have services, which is a bit more complicated issue. I think if you're traveling from let's say, a main station to a main station, so from Gare du Midi to Zurich station, I think that experience can be quite nice, more or less. I mean, it can be, but if you're traveling from a more obscure station, then the experience, I'm sure, varies, which is of course unfortunate, but it is something that we're working for. But of course, also Switzerland is the most perfect example of the European railways we can have. So then if you go more east, the infrastructure is a bit lacking at the moment, but being constantly improved for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Blas. Maybe the life of Linda is probably easier. I don't know because they only have 330 airports from what you mentioned, Blas. But I also before Linda steps in, I just quickly wanted to maybe raise a question for Apur because I know he has to get into a meeting with the government. Uh, so let me just take a step back and maybe Apur, if you're online again or if you're back, um, I'm just trying to go back to my notes, in terms of um, the question I have. Uh, because I know that Sandra and yourself raised this question about EVs and how that's going to work. So maybe one specific question for you, Apur, and maybe for the others. Sandra, you can come back later on this as well. So how are these technologies such as EV and AI? What considerations should policymakers keep in mind to facilitate disability inclusion? Because we are not talking about the digital empowerment here, but it's also more on the infrastructure, and especially when we are talking about uh, electric vehicles, EVs, and with AI technology assistance. Is there anything maybe you want to share there, Apur, before you leave?
Thank you, Sagar. And I'm really, first of all, thankful that you gave me an opportunity of being here, learning from other speakers as well. Regretfully, I'll have to excuse myself for another commitment. But to take a stab at the question that you asked, Sagar, I think when it comes to disability inclusion, it really makes a lot of difference at what point in the life cycle of a particular project you start thinking about it. So, for instance, if you were to start thinking about accessibility interventions right from the design and planning stage of a transport and mobility project, or for that matter, of a digital platform or property, the cost can be as low as 1% of the entire project cost. And I mean, like, you have margins of error which are larger than those. So that's there. When you try and think of it at a later point in time, the cost can be much larger. With EVs and AI both, I think both of them hold a lot of promise to make our ecosystem a better place. And they also hold a lot of promise to bring in a lot of equity and sustainability. The important consideration over here is to make sure that right from the get-go, we think about accessibility. So, to give you a few examples, when we think of accessible electric vehicles, very often what happens is that the battery pack is under the car, and that's where, typically your ramp is fitted. So can we come up with alternative designs that can also be inclusive, not only taking into account what a regular non-disabled individual would be taking. Similarly, for AI, there's a lot of conversation rightfully around what could be its just use, what could be its safe use. But AI also has a lot of potential to bridge inequities, right from generating image descriptions or to help people without sight to be able to understand and navigate through their environments much better, to be able to bridge communication barriers for people who live with loss of hearing and so on, or speech difficulties. So there's a lot of potential over here. And over here, again, it matters how these products are developed, what are the goals, how much emphasis is placed on inclusion, and how it is backed through budgetary allocations and capital allocations, which data sets are used to develop these products. So there's, I mean, in my opinion, the timing that we are at is really enviable, because this level of awareness and sensitivity was not there when the traditional infrastructure was developed in past. Right now, we have that availability, and it's upon people like us to be able to champion and advocate for these interventions to become more disability inclusive. I hope I've answered your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you've also not just answered the question, but also probably raised a question as well for the EV manufacturers, especially to think or rethink. Going back to what Sandro also pointed out about design.
Yeah.
Because at the end
Yeah.
of the day, it's a chain. You can't just say talk about accessibility, but then you have to start. You have to take 10 steps back in order to see how this is all going to work in the end for better inclusion. So thank you, Apur,
Correct.
for that, and we have learned as well from you. Uh, so thank you for joining. But of course, the others, please hold, because we still have Linda to come on board and then share what aviation is doing and how aviation is, providing their services. And just one point also, and the AI, what Apur pointed out, it's applicable to all modes of transport. I mean, not only just for transport, but also for tourism, which Linda is working in that area. So, the information and the images, everything that's coming through AI. So I agree with you. There's huge potential there. But Linda, over to you to tell us about what aviation is doing and what airlines are doing in this regard.
Yeah, thank you, Sagar. Thank you, everyone. I have a presentation, if we can put that presentation online. And it's a pleasure being with you today. And for those who don't know IATA is the International Air Transport Association, and we represent more than 300 airlines in the world, meaning that IATA represents more than all the airlines that we represent, cover more than 80% of the global lanes in business. So this is who we are. We don't represent airports, but airlines. Uh, why for IATA and our members accessibility is important? But first of all, as you mentioned, Sagar, it is because accessibility covers more than 1.3 billions of persons in the world. And we think in IATA with our members that accessible and inclusive aviation is not about persons with disabilities only or the aging population, because in those 1.3 billions of persons in the world, aging population is not included. But this is actually about everyone. So IATA defines itself the business of freedom, but what about bringing freedom to passengers if we cannot do we don't do to all those people who have a disability. So this is not only for us the right thing to do as well, but as you can see from the huge number of people, this also make business sense. So let's move forward. I'm conscious of the time. Okay, so when we look at this context, we realize that we need to do more for the industry, and we started actually doing more for the industry and for the passengers since, believe it or not, 1952. Because that was the time when the first resolution on persons with disabilities was passed by our members, that obviously were not 300, but a bit less at that time. Since then, we have keeping working for making air transport accessible, but more recently, IATA initiated a very specific strategy that touches based on different layers. The first is about regulation, because as you may know, aviation is one of the most regulated industry, transport industry. So the first was about regulations. Well, what do we ask? We ask consistent application of regulatory requirements. And why we do that? Because airlines travel the world, so aircraft, And so aircrafts travel different jurisdictions, and it will be difficult without consistency for passengers to understand to which regulation they have to comply with. The same thing for the airlines. Mostly when those regulations are translated into operational procedures, so are translated into assistance to the passengers, for example. Of course, if we look at this slide, we have 3 benchmark regulations. The first is the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that was adopted in December 26, and in December 2006, that commits to guaranteeing that persons with disabilities are treated equally to those that do not face similar challenges. If a person has to be treated equally, this has to be for all spheres of life, and including air transportation. So what states are doing, they are translating this commitment of the UN Convention into government rules, but actually ensuring that such policy sound workable remains still a critical challenge. You were asking a question previously related to rail transportation. How do we ensure that we have the same kind of assistance? Well, we ensure in aviation, we ensure, and we want to ensure for the consistent application of these regulations. What then is applied to the international civil aviation is regulated by the ICAO, that is the International Civil Aviation Organization, that is the UN agency for civil aviation. So there are already standards in ICAO, the standards that apply to the state regulators, and those standards and best practices are being reviewed. I will go through this in a moment. Are being reviewed, and IATA and other trade associations are supporting ICAO to ensure that we have consistency into all of that. And of course, accessibility is a big part of the sustainable development goals. So I just, in this slide, I'm showing the 3 benchmark regulations, but I'm showing as well to what we know today in regards of different rules. There are much more, because we have Australia recently who is regulating. We have many other countries as well who are coming on board, and that we are aware of. The problem is that sometimes we are not aware of, so we have to apply those rules when those rules come into force. Hopefully, this is going to change in the future. Anyway, but what are the issues? So in those regulations, so there is a misunderstanding of the cost and operational impact of accessibility in the aviation business. Previous speaker was talking about Apur was talking about incentives. Well. It's a good principle. At the moment, there are no incentives for the modernization of the infrastructures, including aircraft infrastructures and airports infrastructures. Everybody talks about the principles of universal design, and it's wonderful. It's included in the UN Convention. How do we make that principle is translated in something that is practical? It's good to say that we have to work together. Well, we have to work together on what? What are the stats? What are the processes? How state members of the UN are coming together to ensure that business can can translate those principles into something that is really practical and usable. Of course, at the moment, this is very unlikely because there is this fragmentation of the application of disability laws, and this is getting worse if state regulators don't start talking between themselves, don't start talking to the trade associations, but also to the disability community. We need to ask to persons with disabilities what they need to implement what they need. How do we know what they want and what they need to travel with dignity and safety, of course, if we don't ask them? This is the first IATA's principles. The trend that we see at the moment is to have reputational regulations. So meaning that, it's important, but not bringing associations and international organizations into the picture will not solve really will not provide freedom to people. There is a rising influence of social media and disability campaigners. It's right, but let's look at that. IATA is looking at accessibility with the safety lenses. It means that we address the issues that we have by creating best practices and by remediating, same as we do with safety. And all the rest I mentioned before, but I'm just taking some stuff that we are working on and the issues that we have as well. What IATA is doing, we are working very closely with the International Civil Aviation Organization. In 2022, there was a milestone resolution that was passed by ICAO during the General Assembly. There had been nothing similar in the past, and these resolutions prioritized accessibility as a key issue in the ICAO regulatory agenda. You see the number of states who signed the working paper that then became the resolution, and you see as well that trade associations are part of this work. So it's states and associations. This means that we want to make transport fully accessible for everyone. The resolution committed state members of ICAO to create a work program on accessible transport, air transport, and a strategy. The objectives will be a long-term strategy and supported by core principles that will take to specific actions, because it's good to talk about what we need to do, but we need to do what we are talking that we need to do. So there will be guidance. IATA will has already worked on some of those guidance, and will put, and we actually share with everyone, are available on our website, and we will share as well more and more with regulators and other industries and other modes of transport. I just wanted to provide you some highlights on the recent concluded IATA Global Passenger Survey that is run every year with passengers. So since few years, we have included assistance for persons with disabilities. So we asked questions to our passengers. So we say, some of the questions that we asked: are you satisfied with the special assistance that you get at the airport and on board? So 8% said that they are satisfied with the assistance service that we provide. But another questions that we asked was which kind of assistance you get. And passengers are requesting more and more special assistance that is likely to be translated into wheelchair assistance. What does this mean? If you see in this slide, you see that there are some jurisdictions where special assistance requirements are higher compared to other jurisdictions. And the reason why I'm providing, I'm actually showing this slide is because there were some presentations from other speakers regarding how do we need to get together and provide innovation. When a passenger who is blind or a passenger who has an invisible disability like dementia, or a child who has autism, for example, and requires special assistance and is put on a wheelchair, are we providing to this person the right service? I don't think so. Because, for example, the chair of the accessibility working group, my working group, is blind. If he goes to the airport, or if he has assistance to an airline or a travel agent or an airport operator, and he is given the wheelchair, I don't think he will be happy, because he is not mobility impaired, but he just needs support to cross the airport, or support, for example, with the onboard of the aircraft. So we will campaign on education on what is needed by passengers to make sure that they travel with dignity, and they receive the service assistance that they need. Another identified area for improvement in the Global Passenger Survey was improved website accessibility for booking and reservations. This can be done through innovation, but actually we will be campaigning on this based on a proof of concept that IATA ran in 2022 and 2023 with stakeholders in Italy. And this is the the proof of concept. Also, these best practices are available for anyone on our website. The proof of concept was called One Click Away. That is the accessibility of information for passengers just one click away from the landing page of our airlines. So basically, passengers need to know which service is provided to them. They need to have this information as soon as possible. We need those information actually as soon as possible to prepare our staff and to ensure that the passengers, for example, if they travel with the mobility aids, so with wheelchairs that, as you know, can be manual wheelchairs, but also battery powered, so with lithium batteries. We need those information as soon as possible because we have to prepare, but lithium batteries are dangerous goods that have to follow certain procedures when they are loaded on board of the aircraft in the cargo compartment of the aircraft. So in this, you will see that more and more on the airline's website, there will be a set of information ready to use by the passengers when they do their bookings. And another thing very important is the guidance material on the safe transport of mobility aids like wheelchairs, scooters, because mobility aids are at the core, transport of mobility aids are at the core of our business. When a mobility aid is damaged, even if we know that fortunately we don't damage many of those, but even one is way too much because it's removing independence to the passenger. So we have worked with the disability community, the wheelchairs manufacturers, with the state regulators. So, for example, with Canada, United States, Department of Transportation, with researchers, airlines, and airports, to try to understand what is the issue related to the mishandling of mobility aids. And we came out with recommendations for our members first, for the airports, and for the passengers, because passengers are part of the travel chain. They are the main actor of the travel chain, actually. So, for example, one of the things that we discovered while we were working with the Mobility Aids Action Group was that mobility aids can get damaged or mishandled in the cargo compartment. But it's not always like this. But for example, infrastructures, if those are not accessible, or the mobility aids sometimes get moved from the check-in or the gate really manually, and the same thing when the mobility aid is loaded in the cargo compartment. So going back to the infrastructures issues, yes, infrastructures needs to be improved, but there has to be as much as possible understanding on how we are going to do this, and as much as possible collaboration with all the different stakeholders, including the state regulators. So this concludes my presentation. So just to say that this is the right thing to do. We are step by step, we are improving. Standards have been updated. Our standards when we started the accessibility priority, we wanted to do first our homework and see where we had to improve. So you will see more and more guidance to be released, and we are happy to work with that modes of transport to see where we can collaborate. And we also know that more and more governments are adopting accessibility regulation. This should be harmonized. And where it is not possible, the harmonization we have at least consistent principles. And we are not doing this only because it's the right thing to do. It's a huge business market opportunity that is still undisclosed, that is still, there is work to do, and we want to do in the right way. So we think that if we get this right now, we think that everybody benefits. So this concludes my presentation, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I think you said like it is the right thing to do. I think with what I said earlier at the beginning, 1 out of 6 are disabled, and the fact that we are actually putting steps, whether individually or sectorally as per each mode, I think we are all trying to put those steps. But as you pointed out, I think it's the consistency, collaboration, and harmonization, I think, is probably what we need to see more happening. Having said that, there's one question, because there's a question as well that we received. Uh, they're asking, so we are talking about consistency. Of course, it's a global sector. Aviation is global, and consistency is key there. And safety, of course, as a transport sector in general, irrespective of which mode of transport we are talking about, safety is a priority. That goes without saying. But what is it that we have to do, especially in developing countries? How is it, what level of information or awareness? Because the examples and whatever investments that are taking place are probably happening in some parts of the world or in some countries, like also Sandra pointed out, Austria, Scandinavian countries. But okay, which is understandable because you need to have a benchmark, you need to set that benchmark as well. But how do we bring them also? That's the question. How do we bring some of these airlines or some of these transport operators on par to provide accessibility solutions on par? Because only then we can talk about consistency. Did
Well,
you get the
the
question?
consistency, yes, the consistency that we need, first of all, is on the rules. There are some developing countries, as you right said so, where accessibility and disability is still a social issue. So there is not too much that has been done. So the first thing, there are, of course, capacity building activities that developed countries are doing with developing countries. And this is part of the program, for example, of the European Union and same ICAO. But the fact is that, airlines, as I said before, we crossed, different jurisdictions. So our airlines already have standards and guidance and best practices that already exist. Sometimes the issue that we have is that states don't have their own regulations, or they just apply regulations by default. And why I'm saying this? Because there are some rules that are, for example, that can be, that's why before I was talking about principles and not a model regulation, because each country has its own peculiarity. And again, this is, I don't want to talk for specific countries because it's not right. I think that states should do that. But what IATA does, we support developing countries with our standards, with our guidance, and with our knowledge as well. Knowing that we are not the regulator, but we want to work with the regulators. And we appreciate when state regulators consult with the trade associations and the disability community. For example, one of the recommendations that we do is to engage with advisory boards, and for more technical solutions to engage with technical for what is aviation, with technical working groups. Then, if it is something more broad, for example, the UNWTO recently passed it's a roadmap for engaging countries in the application of accessible tourism. It's an interesting roadmap. It's an important, not interesting, it's an important roadmap, and invite you really to go to the UNWTO website and look for accessible tourism. More and more, because one of the things that, for example, we are realizing is that, yes, we can make air transport accessible or transport modes accessible, but what if all the rest is not? What if destinations are not? So passengers have to travel, but with freedom, with dignity, safely. But once you arrive at certain destination, you have also to have the opportunity to visit that destination. So that's why before I was saying, yes, it's good to say that we have to work together. What can really be done together using the innovation, using all the good ideas and principles that we have. So I don't know, I'm a practical person, so I really want to see the results of the work that is being done. Because just pointing fingers one against the other, it's not the right way to go, mostly because our passengers who are paying for
Exactly.
that.
That
And
consumers
we want to have passengers on board.
I think consumers or passengers are at the heart
Yes.
of everything that we are doing, and if we are not serving them, or if the steps that we are taking are not resulting in the benefit or in their benefit, then we would lose them, or they will lose the trust in our transport systems. I know that I've taken quite a lot of your time as well, but I have just two questions to the speakers. One is, of course, it's all about technology these days. We have touched on various examples, but if I may ask, either one of you or all of you to quickly respond, is technology really an enabler, or is it actually creating barriers for persons with disabilities? Maybe Sandra, you want to take, because Linda has just maybe she needs to take a break probably, but maybe Sandra, you want to go first?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I mean, we obviously SketGo as a technology provider, we create technology to make transport more accessible, but we only do that because there are humans behind the technology who have the drive to do exactly that, and also because we found clients who pay us to do this as well. So technology really is a tool, and it can only be as good as the people who use the tool. So if you have the most amazing technology, but you've got zero awareness about accessibility, then your tool will probably, or your technology will probably not be much use, because you have failed to integrate those thoughts into it. And so we really need to make sure we start before the technology development, so that then when we move into that, we already have everything in place to create the right tech for this.
Blas, anything to add, or you have something?
Well, I guess it's more of an enabler than a barrier, but if it's applied without consideration, then for sure it can also be a barrier. But I think it's hard to now say generally this is it or this is that. I mean, it comes
True,
down
true, true.
to the the examples. But maybe here, the technology in one country, but I mean that's specific for Europe, but certain things are not harmonized. So if something is applied differently in one country than in the other, then of course, if somewhere red is a go and somewhere green is a go, it can be a bit confusing.
And you rightly pointed out, because I've come across recently someone who's able to use a particular app in a certain language, and language is a big barrier. Like you mentioned, if your passenger is traveling Deutsche Bahn and then they are into Netherlands, and then all of a sudden the app only works in Dutch language, then of course, so they are enablers. Yeah, I see your point. Yeah. Linda, anything to add? Or
But I think technology is by default an enabler. I mean, of access and accessibility. It depends how this technology is used. I just give you an example. The European Disability Card. It's a big tool. It's gonna be a big tool that can improve really the life of many persons with disabilities. If the technology, if the European Disability Card is supported by a technology that will allow, for example, the travel of those persons, not only, for example, the disability card for the travel within a certain country, but people traveling between different countries with different modes of transportation. So if, for example, that disability card is going to be translated into, or at least it's going to be a technology, it's going to be like a technology tool. That is a big enabler because, but again, it's an enabler in the way that, for example, in this case, all the different countries are together. They come together to use the same format and the same language for for example, for the European Disability Card.
Yeah.
So this could be, for example, translated into an app, like as we did when we were using this app for vaccines for COVID. So you have a single tool that can be used everywhere for any mode of transportation. Then technology is enabling. But in the case where you have applications, for example, app where that are not considering universal accessibility principles, or, for example, they don't put into the same app the accessibility features, then technology is impeding, cannot be used. So it's an impediment. It's not it's not enabling.
yeah, no, clear. The other question is about, I think, Blas and yours, and Linda, you raised as well. There is a huge potential in the market. There is a lot of, out of six is disabled, unfortunately, but there is a market which is growing. So, on one hand, transport is, um, a very financially, you need to put in a lot of cost. It's from an investment standpoint. But of course, as a company, you always look into profits, or you have to make some profits. But then at the end of the day, there is this goal: accessibility and inclusiveness. It's kind of difficult to balance that interest, because on one hand we talk about cost, on the other hand there's a profit motive, and then there's something good at the end of the day that we want to achieve. Do you think the operators in general, or technology, whichever, transport operators or technology operators, are they able to balance that, or do you see anything happening, because at the end of the day, do you see the real inclusivity and accessibility being achieved by the operators? Because again, there's too much investment for a specific group of people, and there are so many things that we all want, or uh, everyone wants. Is there anything that you would like to reflect, or probably it's a bit hard, because I don't know how to balance that, or how operators could balance it.
I mean,
Sandra,
uh, sorry. Well, if I can I think the question of achieving accessibility is not under question, so to speak. I think the time component is here. When do we want to achieve it? Not if. At least that's the spirit among the railways. It's as I said, we have 70. If the life cycle of a rolling stock is not on average, but goes up to 70 years, then in rolling stock we'll achieve it in 70 years. In infrastructure, maybe even later. Even though there are efforts to do it faster, of course. And if we want to do it fast, it cannot be only on the operators. Um, of course, if this is just a rule, when you build something new, when you buy something new, you have to, which is now the case, then it will happen. Just it will not happen fast. And I think this is a very bad. I mean, it's if you're a person with disability, that for you doesn't help, right? You want the free travel now, and that's completely understandable. And so I think it's a sort of collaborative effort on this part as a society. I mean, it's because still in the end, I know. I mean, I know everybody knows that airlines are about profit, but about railways, everybody thinks it's about it's state-owned, so it just has to be. But unfortunately, also the governments want my members to be profitable. So in the end, that's the barrier.
I think time is the biggest factor here. Yeah, Sandra, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, and that really relates to what you said, Blaj, as well. And it's definitely a collaborative effort. It's what we see as well as a private company. So I mentioned our client Phoenix earlier in my presentation, who create mobility solutions for underserved and vulnerable communities, people who use paratransit, and people who just don't have access to a lot of transport options. And the transport ecosystem is very fragmented. It's a lot of small providers, a lot of small operators who don't have a lot of resources, technologically, human resources, etc. And with our technology, we're bringing everyone together to benefit from this, and it creates a really amazing ripple effect where the operators are suddenly thriving and doing much better because there's obviously government funding pouring into this, but it really supports the economy in a way that operators do much better because their ridership increases and they can operate more efficiently as well because things are more automated, less manual. But also it creates a massive economic opportunity because there are suddenly more people traveling, and we're reducing that transport accessibility gap by a significant margin, and therefore adding value back to the community. So there's a huge positive ripple effect if it's done right.
Great. I think that's a great addition to the. No, I think it's also a reflection for the operators. If they get to listen to you, Sandra, what you said, I think it's probably going to help them even more or motivate them to do something more for the persons with disabilities. Linda, anything to add or?
But I think that you were mentioning operators and private business. I think that accessibility, when there was this shift from accessibility as medical issue to society issue, it's exactly what it is. It's a society issue because accessibility is not only for persons who are disabled or for the aging population, it's for everyone. So if it is a society issue, I don't think that burden should be put only on the operators. This is a shared thing. We are all part of the society. So, I mean, why this has to be for the operators? Of course, it makes business sense because it's a large number of passengers who will be traveling for what regards aviation. And without passengers, there is no aviation. You remember COVID? When all the airlines were put to stop, there was no travel. But at the same time, if operators are put under constraint for stringent regulations or regulations that don't make sense, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's right. It's a society thing. So I agree with the principle of, and I really very much like that, and I think I'm going to steal that, in regards of APUR, where APUR was saying, yes, there should be incentives as well to the business to do the right thing. We know it's the right thing, but if we receive all those huge regulations, all different from one side to the other, I just could make the number of regulations that we have right now that we have to answer, and how those regulations are applied. I mean, and what is so it's a society thing. There should be a shared responsibility between the private business, private entities, but also the state regulators. And if we have to change, we have to change altogether. So I'm not really keen and to talk about operators, because operators, yes, but it's a huge change that is going to happen. It's going to happen anyway, huh? But
Yeah.
let's do the right thing. Yeah.
Good. I think we are almost at the end of the webinar. I know that you have already taken quite a lot of your time, but if there's any one thing that you want to really put out a message saying that, or maybe you have a wish or an ask in the next 5 years, what is it that you would like to see or change that could bring more inclusiveness for persons with disabilities? What could that be? Maybe next year we're going to talk about the same topic, but at least we need to have that, like a something to wish for, something to look forward to. Is maybe Blas? Is there anything?
Well, railways are always very easy to talk to when it comes to policy. We always ask for one thing, which is more investment in infrastructure. so that's from our point of view, a very easy answer. But maybe to go beyond it, of course, would be what is important to realize is I mean, and I talk here for European Union perspective, not global. Of course, is that whatever solution, regulation, we come up with in the end, and sort of we all can live with, so to speak. Let's let's see the effects of it, for maybe a bit more prolonged time. As long as if we see it's failing miserably, then of course let's talk about it. But let's say if it works, let's not change everything every 5 years. That just won't help anyone, I believe. And I think, the business needs a stable environment. So let's agree on where we want to go, and let's at least from our perspective, let's not talk about new requirements in 5 years. That maybe, I know it sounds weird, but as I said, it's a long process. Let's see the results. Let's talk about them, and then see the way forward.
Can wait and see what transforms or what changes that
Yeah.
could bring. Linda, maybe from an airline standpoint, or
But I know what we want to see. We want to see first better rules. I think I have said this 300 times, but 301 now. We want to see better regulations for sure, and we want to see as well more collaboration with the travel ecosystem. And this is not what we want to see. We know that this is what we are going to see, because more and more people are traveling, and traveling today is not as it was 15 years ago. As to be accessible, the population is aging, it has to happen, and it's happening. So I will see in 5 years more industries collaborating together with the representatives of the disability community, and with the regulators and innovators. So this is what we will see in 5 years.
yeah, thank you. Maybe Sandra, last one.
Yeah, I think that fits in really well with what the previous speaker said, and also I'm all for more funding for rail infrastructure. That would help everybody a lot. But what I want to see is a shift in mindset. I would like people to move away from seeing disability and seeing accessibility and inclusion as an extra, as something special. It's this expression of special needs. My needs aren't special. I just want to get from A to B like everybody else, to get about with get on with my life. So because if we're seeing it as extra and special, it suddenly becomes optional. And I've seen that time and time again when I ask people questions on, so what are you doing in terms of accessibility? Oh yeah, no, we can't do that at the moment, it's too difficult or too costly or too this or too that. It's still an optional, and it shouldn't be. It should be integrated in everything that we do from the start. So there needs to be a change of attitude in people's heads.
Thank you, Sandra. So thank you everyone, to each of you for making the time, and also for the rich contribution towards this topic. As I pointed out earlier, and probably you also said it in your presentations, it's not a topic that we all discuss often. So probably one of the key messages out of this webinar is also that, that has come out, is of course, raising awareness continues to be something that we need to do, especially in the area of transport, because accessibility through transportation modes is super important, because that's the lifeline and lifeblood, or bloodline, sorry. Otherwise we are kind of stuck in one place, for the fear of not able to travel and do things in the way that we wish to do. And I think one of you pointed out about freedom, and the freedom to travel should be there. And then traveling with dignity is also something that has been pointed out. So it's very important that we all do not, think twice to actually go to an airport, or or a station, or even on a street. Like you were talking about mapping. So how technology is assisting, and collaboration. I think awareness and collaboration are key to at least make sure that we bring that inclusion for better inclusion for persons with disabilities. So with that, again, of course, the questions will always remain: infrastructure, incentives, funding. I think that discussion continues. But I think what is key here is that individually, but also collectively, that we work, uh, you know, uh, as you pointed out, among the stakeholders, we have to interact more and try to find the solutions, whatever that works for the community. So thank you again, and really, I thought we were going to be done in like an hour or 1 hour 15 minutes, but looks like we have taken the the full time that we had. So thank you once again to each of you for making this effort, and hopefully. We have made a small contribution. I know it's not going to change the world. Let's face it. Let's be practical there as well. But I think this conversation, or any of these conversations that are taking place across, marking the 3rd December International Day of Persons with Disabilities, I hope we are only trying to bring that little change that we would like to see, and it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you, Sagar.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend. Bye.
Same to you. Bye bye.